Hi, Christine. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Holistic Hub podcast. I'm really excited to interview you today. How are you?
Doing really good. Excited.
Oh, good. Awesome. Well, I like to start these interviews just like I do with every other interview, just hearing your story and what ultimately led you to wanting to start your company, Holistic Homes, and help others create happy, healthy homes that they can live in and not be so stressed about what could potentially be in their environment that could be making them sick.
Yes, it is a very real and unfortunately prevalent issue that many homes built today or even existing homes do have some element of toxicity. Even the EPA estimates at least 50% of homes have some level of mold. And it's becoming more of an issue because more and more people are becoming susceptible to mold and other toxins. My background is in construction. I'm a licensed contractor here in California and consult on new builds all over the US and Canada so that we can finally start building some healthy homes where we're prioritizing occupant health.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And so I'd love to kind of lay the groundwork for those that are looking to identify if they're like suspecting there were any mold issues like in their home. And so I'm just curious, like what are some building materials that might be more prone to mold growth?
Just about everything that we use to build homes. Here in the US, it is very common to build sticked frame homes out of lumber. European areas are more block and brick and more solid construction, but here it's not really cost effective to do that. And it's also not really needed in certain climates. But in parts of Florida and really humid areas, it can make sense. But for existing homes, drywall, insulation, wood, flooring, just about anything that's porous and susceptible to water damage could potentially have mold growth.
Something I saw you post about on your Instagram that I found really interesting was the material that is being used a lot of days now for the baseboards. Can you talk about, like, I think you called it the MDF particle board that is getting used that might be more susceptible. So is that something that's getting used more often now in construction? And then if something simple like a water spill or something occurs, then it's more susceptible to also growing mold in that area?
Yeah, that's one example. And sometimes people will make reference to we don't build them like we used to. Homes 100 years ago were built much more solid than they are today. Not necessarily structurally sound, but we were using like forest grown lumber to build our homes with solid wood doors, solid wood baseboard. But now with construction costs, a lot of materials are just cheaper and they're just not of as high of a quality. So baseboard, casing, now there's LVP flooring. We're just not using the higher quality materials. And so, yeah, something like an MDF baseboard is going to just turn to mush if it comes in contact with water. Whereas solid wood, can handle it a bit better. So we're just not using the best materials, especially when they're like mass production build properties. And maybe the focus there is profit over
Mhm.
building a healthy home.
Mhm. And that was a question I wanted to dive into a little later, but since you kind of touched on it, a lot of the homes that are getting built kind of quickly in like 4 to 6 month periods, right? I'm gonna guess that they're probably using a lot of the cheaper, easier to come by materials in the homes that then, like you're mentioning, the homes are not getting built the way they used to, and then a lot of these different materials are a little bit more prone to mold growth, or potentially just if we were to dive into another area, which is just like off-gassing different chemicals and things like that. But I'm guessing that a lot of those homes that are built kind of fast are definitely not utilizing some of the best supports that could be used in homes that might take a little bit longer. Is that right?
Yes, that is one layer that is creating some toxic homes, and there is a misconception that new construction is the healthiest route. That is not always the case if you're purchasing a home by a production builder. Those homes can sometimes be built in as few as like 4 months, 4 to maybe 6 months. It's very, very fast. Not a lot of time to pause and let materials dry out, verification and leak testing and all of these other steps that should be added but are not in place. So new construction can make families sick if there's undetected leaks, if there's high VOCs in new construction that need to off gas. So the best route to go to really ensure a healthy home is to do a custom new build where we have full control over the architectural details, building material selections, can select non-VOC materials, better insulation. We've got a lot more control over that.
Yeah, no, understandably so. And, in the area that we were just talking a little bit off camera about was just that we both live in, Southern California, and this part of Southern California is just expensive. And so sometimes it's harder, I think, to maybe go the custom build route. Now, you're obviously going to know more about that than I do. So, can you kind of weigh in on that in terms of like, let's just say there's a new family trying to try to find like a home that they can move into, but they're trying to weigh their options. And sometimes those master plan communities or that are going up a little bit quicker are cheaper and more affordable than being able to go into like a custom built home. So in those situations, maybe it's better to be renting and just making sure that you're staying in a place that is safe in terms of like the air quality and the materials used, or what's kind of maybe the pros and cons like in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, and I really do think like there's nothing wrong with renting. Like
Mhm.
if you are a family who's got chemical sensitivities, Lyme, mold illness, SIRS, like if you are a sensitive family or your children are affected by mold and you have found a rental where everyone is thriving and healthy, I would not trade that in. Like, I know homeownership is, like the American dream, but if your family is healthy and thriving and you are in a rental, I think that is great. That is winning. Now, if you want to do a custom new build, that can be a very big financial and emotional expense. And, it's not something that you want to do alone or just leave in the hands of your builder. So, here, yeah, Southern California, it's going to be costly because there's also no land. So we're in an area where you can't just buy a piece of land and build a home on it. You have to buy a piece of land that already has a home on it, even if it was built 60, 70 years ago and completely original. You're likely going to be spending somewhere between 1.5, $2.5 million on the land and the home and then tear it down. So
Mhm.
that's not always practical if you're in
Mhm.
an area where there's no land. So the next best thing that we typically see is like purchasing an existing home, not one that's been flipped or renovated and looks all beautiful, one that's more in like original condition, because the most successful way to renovate a home is to be able to gut it. Like
Mhm.
to purchase an existing home and then want to just like upgrade the kitchen, well, that leaves a lot of unknowns of is a bathroom leaking? How diligent were the previous owners with changing the filter on the mechanical system? When you're purchasing an existing home, there is a lot that we don't know, even with real estate disclosures. There could have been an instance where the toilet overflowed, but that homeowner didn't think much of it because they dried it up
Mhm.
right away. So, if purchasing an existing home, I much prefer to buy something that is original condition. I can completely gut it, all new plumbing, all new drains, roof, like everything. So then again, I can like during construction verify with leak testing and other inspections along the way versus just trusting what the prior owners did.
Mhm. Talking about leak testing, I've heard you talk about this before, so I know this is something that you definitely mention a lot in like your posting and when you've been interviewed before about when you're in a new construction build, that's something that you definitely want to be implementing, obviously before all the walls go up and before you're unable to do any of that leak testing. So can you explain a little bit to the listeners like what that means?
Yeah, yeah. Leak testing is a very big deal. Building code does not require it. So,
Mhm.
um, if you are building a home or purchasing an existing home, building codes now do not prioritize occupant health. They've come a long way and done great things for structural integrity. So we have safe homes, especially in our earthquake-prone area
Mhm.
or tornado and hurricane areas. They are structurally sound. The other thing building codes has prioritized is energy efficiency. So we've all switched to LED lights. That's not the best for our health, but energy efficiency, having more airtight homes, using less electricity, that's what building codes has prioritized. As far as leak testing, the only element required to be leak tested is a shower pan. That's it. So you can have an existing home or a new build, put all new windows in, put a skylight in. You could do all of those things. Nobody's required to leak test it. But my question is always, how on earth do we know if those new windows are leaking if no one is leak testing it? So I think it's
Mhm.
quite silly to not have that in place.
Oh, definitely. That's actually kind of amazing that building codes don't require there to be leak testing because you'd think that that would just be such an important piece to have added in. Is that in all states that that's not like with the building codes that that's not allowed, or is that in just like certain parts of America?
So in the US and other countries, there's a universal building code.
Okay.
And each state and jurisdiction adopts a portion of it and then they like will add to it their own, Florida's got
Yeah.
additional building codes, Texas somewhat, but there are some states that don't add to or modify to make that building code apply to their climate zone. So
Okay.
as far as leak testing, that's just like a universal international building code of leak testing the shower pan. But no, windows in a residential setting are not required to be leak tested.
When it comes to windows, are there certain types of frames on windows that are better suited for not allowing there to be any leak issues, or is it just a matter of like the way that they're placed into the walls? Like what's kind of like how just curious, like if there's any type of window that's like better suited for like being less of a chance of being leaky.
Yes and no. Yes, in the instance of windows, they come in many different materials, vinyl, fiberglass, aluminum clad. There's a lot of different materials, and that plays into a factor of it. But if you have an existing home and you got windows or purchased an existing home, windows will sometimes be retrofitted, meaning they've taken out the existing window and popped a new window in its place. And these mostly vinyl retrofit type of windows came on the market as a replacement for the old style single pane aluminum frames to where you could still leave that aluminum frame in place and pop in this new retrofit type of window. The problem is, and you can tell if you have one of these windows, you can go on the outside of your home and look to see if it has like a very thick vinyl frame. Maybe it's about like 2.5, 3 inches. And it looks like it's applied onto the stucco or onto the siding. If it has that thick frame and there's probably some silicone around it, it's likely this retrofit type of window. So it's not integrated into the flashing of your home, the waterproofing. And so you are solely reliant on this little tiny
Oh my God.
layer of silicone to make sure no water is coming in. So if you do have those type of windows, good to know about it, but also good to be really diligent on the maintenance and making sure there's no gaps in this little silicone holding onto your exterior to make sure no water comes in. So retrofit windows are not great because you don't have an opportunity to like really reflash and waterproof this opening of the window. So in new construction, they are using new construction windows. And the most important part of a window is not the window itself, it's the flashing of how it is waterproofed and integrated into the framed opening. So there's lots of strategies with encouraging rainwater to not flow into your
Mhm.
window, but when we're going through the design development process of a new construction home with the architect, a big kind of mindset shift if you're building a home is we put so much emphasis on creating these like watertight exteriors and watertight roof. We got to keep the water out and we nail it in and get that in. But then all of the windows and doors are like punching holes through that nice watertight layer. So we want to treat these holes as like really robust waterproofed areas.
Mhm. That's so interesting. Thank you for touching on that. I was super curious about that. So, I think I get this next question a lot from many different clients, so I'd love to address it on here. So, what are some mold resistant materials and do they actually work? Like there's like mold resistant paint and then there's other mold resistant materials that I know can go into the construction of a home. So I'd be curious to hear your answer on that and if they actually work or what might be some of the factors that play into that.
Water resistant, mold resistant, fungal resistant. There's a lot of creative language.
Mhm.
I think that it is an area, and you've probably talked about this in like cleaning supplies and other things. Just as there's greenwashing in the beauty industry, there's very much greenwashing happening in the construction industry as well. And those terms of mold resistant are not giving you the security that you need. An example of that would be like if you were to go to a big box hardware store and look in the drywall aisle, you'll see drywall that has green paper, you'll see one that has purple paper, and they are sold and advertised as mold resistant drywall. It's not actually the case because what those materials are they are paper face drywall. So the face of it is paper, but it is sprayed with a fungal inhibitor. So it's still paper. Not to also mention the backside of all of these water resistant drywalls is paper that doesn't have any fungal inhibitor. So when you think of a mold resistant drywall, you think it's going to be mold resistant, not just the face of it has this inhibitor that breaks down over time. And what if there's a leak behind that wall? There's no fungal inhibitor there. So being aware of materials that are not probably going to be as mold resistant as advertised, but also what is like the toxic exposure to these fungicides. So, in the case of wanting to have like a water damage resistant home, it really starts with like keeping the water out. And for all the plumbing lines that we have in our home, all throughout our walls. What are we doing to like monitor and safeguard those so that we don't end up with a leak behind the
Mhm.
kitchen sink or the island or any of these areas. So I think that sometimes the focus is like how many mold resistant materials can I install in my home versus putting the emphasis on how can I make sure I don't have undetected
Mhm.
leaks.
Such a great point. And that is a great lead into something else I wanted to talk about was just talking about the plumbing and what are some of the recommendations that you make to your clients and audiences about just being able to like have something in place to detect if like there was going to be if there is a potential leak going on so that way we can get ahead of it before it becomes a worse issue.
Yeah, that's a big area. We build our homes with drain lines and plumbing and lots of other elements that could cause water damage. And something that every new construction home or existing can always maybe mention it to your landlord if you're renting. But there are whole home leak detecting devices that can be installed on your plumbing, ideally, you know, I say as early in the line as possible, but it's probably somewhere near your front door or your garage where the water is coming in. And having a whole home device will actually monitor the flow of your water and alert you if there is a leak. It also does like a micro leak test every night. There's a few different ones that are available on the market. The most simplest one that really any plumber can install is Flow by Moen and gives you a lot of good insight onto what's actually happening with all the plumbing going on behind your walls.
So, question then, if it's being installed, like kind of like where that water is incoming, and it's monitoring the flow. So how does it actually detect leaks by the flow rate?
hmm So, irregular flow. So it
Okay.
learns what's a toilet, what's a shower, what's a sink. It begins to learn the water usage in your home. And so if and in the evening, like 2, 3 a.m., it will run a leak test where no water should be flowing at all,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so if it's detecting that there is a flow of water, it will alert you of a potential leak.
Okay. And then that's amazing. And can it also, but would it have a hard time telling you exactly like maybe like where the issue is that it'll tell you that there is an issue, or is that a matter of like kind of placing them in different parts of the house so that you kind of get more of an idea? Like, how does that work?
It's not going to pinpoint where it
Yeah.
is, but the way that you could discover that is either with like a moisture meter
Yeah.
or a thermal camera, which are both devices you could find off of
Mhm.
Amazon. Good little tools to have in your homeowner toolbox. But it wouldn't alert you of exactly where it is.
Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes in those cases too, it's so great to be alerted that there could be an issue, but then maybe just using like that internal compass or just kind of like just getting an idea of your surroundings, being like, is there an area of the house that might feel a little bit more moist, or maybe you've had a sense that there could have been an issue there, or that could be an issue there, maybe just kind of like using that like sixth sense to being like, okay, like what's going on, and then using the tools that you just mentioned to be able to like that actually test, right?
Yeah.
See if that's an issue. Okay, cool. So moving on to another area of the home that I know there can be a lot of issues with mold growth. So HVAC systems, I was curious how that can be a place that might be harboring like an overgrowth of mold. And like, yeah, because that can be really affecting people if they're using their HVAC systems all day, all night, right? And it's just constantly blowing that air into the home making people sick. So how can that possibly be leading to mold growth? And then how can we identify that?
HVAC systems are big problems in many, many homes.
Mhm.
Rentals, one, because no one's really doing any diligent maintenance. Like an HVAC system should be maintained every year the coil should be clean, the condensate line should be clean. Like there should be some routine maintenance on your HVAC system, and that rarely happens in rentals. Um, Another case against not purchasing an existing home because you are inheriting someone else's ductwork with their dead skin cells in it, their pet dander, whatever else was going on in that home prior. So that is living in the ductwork of an existing home. But it can be problematic because traditionally, up until recently, HVAC systems were just based off of square footage. You had X amount of square footage, you had, a 3-ton unit, 5-ton unit, and there was no calculations happening around like how the home was performing. Like, was it airtight? Was it semi-airtight? Was it leaky? Like, how much airflow did it need? There needs to be some like thorough calculations, which now is referred to as like a manual J calculation. But um, if your home is designed without HVAC calculations, it will likely lead to potential condensation. Like if the airflow is restricted, if your air is not properly balanced, that can lead to condensation. Like if the the registers of your duct system
Mhm.
like have condensation or there's like water accumulating, like that is a problem. So HVAC systems are notoriously problematic. They're also very problematic if anyone is undergoing like a mold remediation. I've heard
Mhm.
numerous times of mold remediations occurring, but nobody has ever looked at the ductwork. And so they've spent sometimes six figures on a remediation. Everyone moves back in, they turn on the heating system and everyone's sick again because no one's looking in there. So the mechanical system should definitely be evaluated if you're in an existing home and there's, mold illness occurring. If you're going to be building a home, we are adamant on every single project we are involved in. A high performance mechanical designer, we bring them in. We are talking through like whole home air filtration, dehumidification, bringing in fresh air. Like we fully understand it is the lungs of the home, and that is how you're getting your fresh air.
I love that, the lungs of the home. You mentioned routinely checking. Is there like a certain amount of times, like per year, that you recommend somebody, like whether they're in their own home or rental home or whatever it is, but to like maybe be routinely checking to make sure that there is no issue that's arising in that area?
If I had my choice, I do like to have the at least like the air handler, the furnace, the
Mhm.
coil inspected twice a year. So
Mhm.
once when you're transitioning from heating to cooling, and then
Mhm.
same when you're going from cooling to heating, and
That's
having like
awesome.
that twice a year maintenance.
That's great. Thank you. So, I wanted to move on to another area of the home that we don't deal with here really in California, but basements. So, how I'm curious how this can be an issue because with a lot of the clients that I work with that are not in California, a lot of the times that's where we're finding what part of the issue at least is just the mold growth that's there. So, how is it that basements can be an area that harbors like, or it's more easily accessible to having mold growth? And then what, I guess, is there anything that can even be done about that? Because I know that like it can be a little bit more like higher humidity down there, which is why that also can create more mold growth. So I'm just curious your thoughts and stuff on that.
Basements can be a challenge.
Hmm.
Yeah. The problem is, again, kind of like beating this topic, is that
Yeah.
basements are built to building codes. Building codes are a very bare minimum standard. And so when a basement is built to building codes and they get the check from the local city inspector, there is one layer of what's called damp proofing, which is waterproofing. It's like
Mhm.
a asphalt liquid tar, basically, that is applied. Well, that breaks down over time. That is not a material that's going to last 100 years. So older homes on the East Coast that were
Mhm.
built 50, 60 plus years ago, that damp proofing has probably started to break down. And anytime there's like wet soil pushing up against that damp proofing, there's likely to be water intrusion in the basement walls. So that can sometimes be evident by something called efflorescence. It's kind of like this white, chalky, splotchy look, which is like calcium deposits on the basement walls. Also, basements should ideally be left unfinished for a good period of time, especially if they're newly built. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of moisture that went into the slab, the concrete walls. So we've got to let that dry out before we're closing it up with insulation and drywall. So there is a healthy way to build a basement, and it goes above and beyond building codes, but it's definitely an area that you want to prioritize if you're building a basement because it is one of those areas that's like one and done. You're not going to build your basement ever again, and so you want to make sure that it's built in a watertight assembly. But if an existing basement does have water intrusion, it's a challenge because ideally the waterproofing is happening on the exterior and not like being patched up from the interior.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So, what are some other areas of the home that maybe you've seen come up like time and time again after working with people that like maybe are a couple because we touched on HVAC, basements and windows and different things like that. So, are there any other areas of the home that you have found just to be like a problem for mold growth that like people might not even think about?
An area that's not talked about enough, but is a very big critical detail of building a home is the attic.
Mhm.
Um, you and I kind of just went through this whole experience of having some massive wildfires here in Southern California and just seeing it completely wipe out entire streets.
Mhm.
And the question of like, how did that happen? Like in California, we have some of the strictest building codes in the US.
Mhm.
We've got fire prone areas. We've got seismic requirements with earthquake activity. We've got the coastal commission because we're close to the water in some areas, but still, we've got affluent areas like Pacific Palisades that completely burnt down. So, how does that happen and how does it, catch like wildfire basically is that ventilated attics, meaning there's like soffit vents and there's ridge vents or vents higher up on the roof. And that is designed so that airflow is pulled into that attic and like there's some air circulation up there. Well, it just takes an ember to get swept up into the attic and these homes are literally burning from the inside out. So an ember gets in the attic, and then that house
It,
is shortly burned down. So that's one element is definitely like the fire risk
yeah.
of having a ventilated attic. And if you're going to be spending, $1 million or $2 million building a home, you want to make sure that it's watertight and also not going to be a fire hazard.
Mhm.
So that's one aspect to it, but also if you have a ventilated attic, you've got airflow up there, that's technically outside space. Like that is not a conditioned sealed space like the rest of your home. And so if you're living in an area like Texas, it's got very high humidity and you've got a ventilated attic, there's potential for mold growth up in that attic. Um, so not all climate zones should have ventilated attics. Sealed and conditioned attics are ideal. Um, but it's just another area to be mindful of like how the home is being designed.
That's interesting. Thank you for touching on that. And I'm curious, we kind of talked a little bit about it earlier. You mentioned just some tools that somebody can have like on hand to if like they're suspecting that there's any issue. Are there other like peace of mind supports that people can also kind of have in their home to detect anything or prevent and or just like yeah or to detect anything as well, because you mentioned thermal camera as well as moisture reader. Is there anything else that you have recommended like for any of your clients or audience members just to like have on hand just in case like they're suspecting anything?
Yeah, our homes are really important, and I'll sometimes use the analogy of like, if you were in the market for a new car and you went to the car dealership, you found this like beautiful car, you got into the driver's seat, and there was no dashboard. Like all you had was a gas gauge. That's it. Like, would you buy that car? Would you feel safe like driving that, not having a checked engine light or not knowing the coolant temperature? We have so much information about our cars. We take
Hmm.
it in before the warranty expires. Our homes have none of that. We have,
Hmm.
these probably our most costly investment. And all that we have is a thermostat. That's all we know is like the temperature. Sometimes if we have a good one, it'll tell us the humidity, but
Hmm.
that's it. Like we don't have any data about our homes typically. So get a dashboard for your home, get a whole
Hmm.
home leak detecting device, monitor your plumbing, know what's going on with your indoor humidity levels, know what's going on with your indoor carbon monoxide levels. Like don't just rely on the smoke and carbon monoxide detector, at the top of
Hmm.
your ceiling. Get something that's actually telling you the parts per million, like a digital reading of like, hey, red flag, you've got some carbon monoxide over here next to your
Hmm.
gas range. Um, that's another one. CO2 is another one. A big one that's not really monitored would be radon. Radon
Hmm.
is colorless, odorless. So point being, we've got to have like more information about our
Hmm.
homes because if we are monitoring the indoor humidity levels and we have that data, and then all of a sudden we start to see that it's creeping up to like 70, 75%, it's like, oh, maybe I should look into this a little bit more. Maybe there's a leak going on. So there's some good like indoor air quality monitoring devices, but
Hmm.
just get really informed on what's going on inside your home.
That was a great analogy. And
Mhm.
also, I love that. And also, that's why these conversations are so important to have. And I know that's why you're out there, spreading awareness on all this. And because I feel like we don't think about our homes the way we would think about something else, like our cars or anything else, for example, right? And so just being able to like have these things in place and being able to constantly keep monitoring, keep checking, just make sure things are going good because nothing is ever fully foolproof. And so we want to make sure we can get ahead of things before it gets worse. So I'm loving that I love the way you chat about all this topics and just bringing awareness to that. So let's just say that then somebody is suspecting a mold issue in their home and doesn't really know where to start in terms of testing. Should I bring in an inspector or should I do an ERMI test first? Like where would someone like you, Christine, come into the picture then, I suppose, in terms of like their house as well. So what would be kind of like if you were to just like kind of give like a quick step-by-step approach for somebody suspecting something, would they run an ERMI test first? Should they look into like a good quality mold inspector that they really trust first and have them do the testing? Like what's kind of your approach, would you say?
My approach, and I very much like stay in my lane. Like I
Mhm.
am contractor, I am here to like build it right from the start. My goal is no one would ever need a mold inspector or ERMI test in the future.
Mhm.
But it is still needed, and ERMI tests were not intended to be like DIY mold test.
Mhm.
So getting an ERMI test can be really alarming. There's false positives, false negatives. Like you're collecting dust is basically what you're testing. So if you are in an existing home or an apartment and you suspect that there is mold, a mold inspector is the best way to go. Like
Mhm.
someone who's coming in that's not just doing an ERMI or an air or wall cavity, like that inspector should be in your crawl space, in your attic, in your mechanical system. If you are doing a mold inspection without getting to the root cause, that is a waste of a mold inspection. You can't just say there's an air test and it found mold, so looks like it might be the bathroom. Let's go demo the bathroom.
Mhm.
You're going to end up with a failed remediation because you never got to the root cause of the issue. So I would not DIY any petri dishes or ERMIs. I would hire a mold inspector that's going to actually give data, find the root cause, and come up with a protocol that is then handed over to a mold remediation company. You and I hear of sometimes of like, we think we have mold, we see a little bit under the kitchen sink, and so we're going to do a kitchen remodel anyways because it's outdated. So contractor's going to come in, demo everything, and then we'll have a clean slate. Like that could be the wrong route. Like, is there containment? Is
Mhm.
all of this demo just going to kick up, mold spores and it's going to be, in other areas of your home? So proceed with caution on doing any sort of DIY mold anything. And then once the root cause has been addressed and like green light, there is no more um, mold in the home, then rebuilding in a healthy way that is going to have safeguards in place.
Thank you. And now let's say somebody is now looking to build a home from the ground up, like in terms of your specialty. How, like, do they first, like, would somebody just like go to you first and then you would then like identify like which like home builders would be best and like architects and like the different like and like you kind of like help them pick the team, or like what's working with like a holistic like construction consultant like yourself like look like the process, I suppose.
We've done it many different ways. The client, I would say like 90% of our clients are mold affected families where
Mhm.
like building a healthy home is just not negotiable. Like this is it. They've lived in
Yeah.
prior moldy homes. And so we do want to like create an entire team of the architect, the builder, third party inspectors, whoever else is on the team. Everyone must have the same common goal of whatever needs to happen and collaborate
Mhm.
together to make sure this is a home that this family is going to thrive in. And there's a spectrum of like, mold toxicity and EMF exposures and all of these
Yeah.
things. So how can we accommodate the clients' like expectations with their budget? And so
Mhm.
that's something we want to collaborate on. So ideally, we are working with families once they've selected their lot, and we have a free guide on how to, find the right lot if you're at that stage. And then from there, we want to start interviewing and vetting architects and builders. Now, at this point, we have probably like 60 different referrals all over the US of different architects and builders. And so we can certainly start there. But I do also find that many times homeowners are, married to like a certain aesthetic or really like this one architect or they have a relationship with another builder. So we're not always working with like high quality, high performing builders. We just need that builder to be able to implement the right strategies. So we work with great builders and also not the best of the
Mhm.
best. And it's really just about implementing the homeowner's expectations and having like verification along the way and us being their advocate to make sure that nothing is like falling through the cracks and, being overlooked.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast and just getting to share your story, what it is you do, and just all the helpful pieces of information that you gave that I know is going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much. And I'd love to just leave it with any final words that you would like to mention, as well as like where people can find you. And I just have one question to tack onto that is, do you work with clients like nationwide? It's not just in California, or do you mainly see people in California?
No, we are consulting on projects all over the US
Awesome.
and Canada. Here in
Okay.
California is where I like build and renovate here locally, but there's a much bigger need than just our little bubble down here
Yeah.
in Southern California. So we are active on many projects all over the US. We do only take like a handful of one-on-one clients each year because it's so in depth. And we have an application for people to apply to that. Um, and then I think your other question was,
Yeah, where people can find you and
um,
like, like, yeah.
yeah, on Instagram, I try to give like just as much kind of free information as possible. So Instagram is where you can find like our free guide. You can apply to work with us, get some free tips on there. And then the last thing I would kind of just leave all of the listeners with is this is not like coming from a place of fear or panic. Try to be very mindful just in my content and how I approach like building. It should not be based out of fear. We are not here to make decisions out of, just the scareness of like not building a basement because the
Mhm.
last basement was, brittled with mold. Or today I spoke with someone who was fearful of building a garage because the bathroom over the garage had mold. And sometimes I will even have people come to me say, "I'll live anywhere in the US. Just tell me where to move and I'll move there because I need a healthy home." And that's not how we want to be building. Like, if you're not going to thrive living in Arizona because all of
Mhm.
your family is in Florida, but you're afraid to build in
Mhm.
Florida, like, we need to just change that perspective because we can
Yeah.
build a healthy home anywhere. And we want to make sure it's going to like emotionally be satisfying as well as like also allow your family to thrive and heal.
Those were very positive words. We can build a healthy home anywhere. I love that. So thank you, Christine. This was an amazing conversation. I can't wait for people to listen to it. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.